My parents told every employer in town that I was a thief. Not once. Not in anger. Not in some moment they could later deny. They said it calmly, repeatedly, strategically. I didn't know at first. I just thought I was unlucky. Interview after interview, rejection after rejection, polite emails that all sounded the same. We've decided to move forward with other candidates. We're looking for a better fit. We'll keep your resume on file. I counted them. 27 interviews in 18 months. And not one offer. Not even a second round. And then one HR manager slipped. Just enough. She looked at me, paused, and said, "Off the record, you might want to clear up whatever's being said about you." I didn't understand. Not yet. But I would. Because 2 days later, my father called me. And he didn't deny it. He didn't even hesitate. He just said, "Maybe now you'll learn to respect us." And then he hung up. I wish I could tell you I screamed. I wish I could tell you I fought back. But I didn't. I just sat there staring at my phone, realizing something I wasn't ready to understand. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was a decision. They didn't just want to control me, they wanted to erase me. 2 years. That's how long it lasted. 2 years of watching less qualified people get hired. 2 years of calculating rent down to the dollar. 2 years of wondering if maybe, just maybe, they were right about me. And then, last week, I finally got a job interview. A real one. Midtown Manhattan. 42nd floor. Glass walls. The kind of place where people don't even look at you unless you belong there. I sat in that chair, hand steady, heart not so steady, waiting for another rejection I could already feel coming. The door opened. The CEO walked in. He looked at me longer than normal. Not confused. Not skeptical. Something else. Recognition. And then he said something that didn't belong in an interview. "Before we start, I need to give you this." He placed an envelope on the table. Thick. Cream-colored. My name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. "Your grandmother left it with strict instructions." I didn't touch it right away, because suddenly nothing about my life made sense anymore. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story, and drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? My name is Amelia Wilson. I'm 30 years old, and for most of my life, I believed something about myself that wasn't true. Not because I was naive, not because I was weak, but because when the people who raised you repeat something enough times, it stops sounding like a lie. It starts sounding like identity. I wasn't always the thief. That label came later. At first, I was just the difficult one. The one who asked too many questions. The one who noticed things that didn't quite add up. My older brother, Daniel, he was the easy one. The successful one. Straight path. Clean story. The kind of son you introduce with pride at dinner parties. Me? I was the one who didn't fit the narrative. That's what my mother used to say. "Amelia, you always make things harder than they need to be." I didn't understand what that meant when I was 10, or 12, or even 16. But I started to understand it at 19, the first time money went missing. It wasn't a lot. $3,000 from a joint account my parents had set up for emergencies. I remember the exact number because my father repeated it 3 times at the dinner table. $3,000. $3,000. $3,000. Like if he said it enough, it would echo into truth. "We're not accusing you," my mother said softly, not looking at me. "We just need to understand." But my father, he didn't soften it. He looked straight at me and said, "You've always had a complicated relationship with responsibility." That was the first time I felt it. Not anger. Not even hurt. Something colder. Something quieter. Like a door closing somewhere deep inside me. I didn't take the money. I said that. Calmly. Clearly. But here's the thing about being the difficult one. When you defend yourself, it sounds like deflection. When you explain, it sounds like excuse. And when you stay calm, it sounds like calculation. So no matter what I did, I was already guilty in the version of the story they had decided to tell. That night didn't explode. There was no screaming. No dramatic acquiescence. Just a shift. Subtle. Permanent. After that, things started to change. Small at first. My access to accounts disappeared. Conversations stopped including me. Decisions were made, and I found out later. And then came the comments. Casual. Almost careless. Amelia is still figuring things out. Amelia needs structure. Amelia makes impulsive choices. Each one small enough to ignore. But together they built something. A version of me that I didn't recognize, but everyone else seemed to accept. By the time I graduated college, that version had solidified. Not publicly, not officially, but enough. Enough that when I applied for my first real job, something followed me. Invisible. Quiet. But consistent. I didn't know it then. I thought I just needed to try harder. Be better. Prove them wrong. That's what I told myself every time I walked into another interview. Every time I smiled, shook hands, answered questions with precision, and walked out knowing I had done everything right. And still nothing. It took me almost a year to realize this wasn't about performance. It was about reputation. And reputation, once it's been rewritten, doesn't need evidence to survive. It just needs repetition. And my parents were very, very consistent. I did not confront them right away. That is the part people always get wrong when they hear a story like this. They imagine a dramatic moment. A daughter storming into the living room. A voice raised. A truth demanded. But that is not how it happens when the damage is quiet. When it is deliberate. When it is designed to leave no fingerprints. I did not confront them. I started collecting. The first confirmation came 3 months after that HR comment. A mid-sized accounting firm in Queens. I had made it to the final round. 3 interviews. 1 case study. A 2-hour assessment. I knew I had it. I could feel it in the way they spoke to me. In the way the hiring manager leaned forward when I explained my process. In the way she said, "We will be in touch very soon." That night, I allowed myself something I had not felt in a long time. Relief. Not excitement. Not hope. Just relief. Like I could finally breathe without calculating how many dollars were left in my account. But the next morning the email came. Same tone. Same structure. Same distance. "We regret to inform you." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I did something I had never done before. I replied. Not emotional. Not defensive. Just 1 line. "Could you please provide feedback on my candidacy so I can improve?" I did not expect a response. Most companies do not respond. But she did. 3 hours later. Short. Careful. Almost hesitant. "Amelia, off the record, your qualifications were strong. This decision was influenced by external references we could not ignore." External references. I read that sentence 5 times. Then 10. Then I closed my laptop and sat there in silence. Because now I knew. This was not random. This was not bad luck. This was a pattern. And patterns can be traced. I made a list that night. Every company I had applied to in the past 18 months. 32 names. I started calling them. Not all. Just the ones where I had reached final rounds. The ones where rejection made no sense. Most did not answer. Some redirected me to generic HR lines. But three conversations changed everything. The first was a startup in Brooklyn. The recruiter spoke quickly, like she did not want to be on the call too long. "We received a concerning character reference regarding financial misconduct," she said. I asked who it came from. She paused. Then, "We are not authorized to disclose that." The second was a consulting firm in Midtown. The HR associate was younger, less guarded. "It came from someone who identified themselves as your family," she said quietly. They were very specific. I remember gripping the edge of my desk so hard my fingers went numb. "Specific how?" I asked. Another pause. Then, they said there had been incidents involving missing funds. That it was an ongoing issue. I thanked her. I ended the call. I did not cry. Not yet. The third call, that one stayed with me. It was a regional bank in New Jersey. I had driven 45 minutes for that interview. Paid for parking I could not afford. Worn the same navy blazer I had been wearing for 2 years. The hiring manager recognized my name immediately. "Amelia Wilson," he said slowly. "I remember your file." He did not sound surprised. He sounded certain. "Can I ask you something?" he continued. "Why did your father call us before your interview?" The room went quiet, completely still. I could hear the faint hum of traffic outside my window. I could hear my own breathing, but I could not answer, because in that moment, everything aligned. Every rejection, every identical email, every polite smile that did not quite reach the eyes. My father had not just spoken to one employer. He had built a narrative. One phone call at a time. One warning at a time. "I just want to make sure you are aware," he would say, I imagine. Calm. Professional. Concerned. There have been some issues in the past. He did not need to prove anything. He did not need documents. He only needed to introduce doubt. And doubt is enough. I ended that call without finishing the conversation. I sat there for a long time after. No tears. No anger. Just clarity. Because now I understood the scale of it. This was not about one accusation from years ago. This was not about correcting a misunderstanding. This was a system. A controlled narrative that followed me into every room I entered before I even opened my mouth. And the worst part, the part that took me the longest to accept, was that it worked. It worked because of who they were. My father, respected, established. The kind of man whose word carried weight in rooms I had never even been invited into. My mother, supportive, calm, the perfect echo. Together, they did not sound like people making accusations. They sounded like people offering warnings. And employers listen to warnings, especially when they come from people who sound credible. I looked at my bank account that night. $1,842. Rent due in 12 days. I opened a spreadsheet. I calculated everything. Groceries, utilities, transportation. Every dollar had a place. Every decision had a consequence. There was no margin left for hope. Only strategy. If I could not control what they were saying, I needed to understand how it moved, who they called, when they called, what they said. I started documenting everything. Dates, company names, contact points, patterns in language, patterns in timing. And slowly something began to emerge. A structure. Not random calls. Not emotional outbursts. But a system that mirrored something I had seen before. Something familiar. Not in my life, but in my work. Fraud patterns. The way misinformation spreads through trusted channels. The way a single unverified claim becomes accepted truth. When repeated by the right voice. I had spent 2 years being treated like a risk. Like a liability, like a problem to be avoided. But sitting there, staring at that spreadsheet, I realized something that changed everything. If I could map how they destroyed my reputation, I could map how to dismantle it. And for the first time in 2 years, I did not feel stuck. I felt focused. I stopped looking for jobs the way other people do. I stopped chasing postings. Stopped refreshing inboxes. Stopped waiting for approval from people who had already been told who I was before they ever met me. Instead, I started studying them. Not the companies. Not the recruiters. My parents. The way they spoke. The timing of their calls. The language they used when they needed to sound credible. It was not emotional. That was the part that made it effective. They never said, "She stole from us." Not directly. They said things like, "There were some financial inconsistencies." Or, "We just want to make sure you are aware of past issues." Calm. Controlled. Concerned. The kind of tone that makes people lean in instead of question. I wrote everything down. Every phrase I could remember. Every pattern I could reconstruct from those calls. And then, I did something that surprised even me. I started learning how to do exactly what they were doing, but better. Not manipulation. Not lies. Structure. Systems. The architecture of information. I could not get hired, but no one could stop me from learning. So, I built my own curriculum. Every morning at 5 o'clock, I sat at the small kitchen table in my apartment with a notebook and a second-hand laptop that took 3 minutes to turn on. I mapped financial systems. I studied forensic accounting cases. I downloaded public records and traced transactions just to see if I could follow the flow without missing a step. 8 hours a day. Sometimes 10.
No salary. No validation.
Just repetition. And something started to happen. Slowly at first. Then, all at once. I began to see patterns faster than I could explain them. Connections that were not obvious. Gaps that other people overlooked because they trusted the surface too much. It felt familiar. Not new. Like something I had always known how to do but had never been allowed to trust. I remembered something my grandmother used to say when I was younger. Amelia, you do not read information the way other people do. You build it. At the time, I thought she was just trying to make me feel better. Now, I understood. I was not struggling because I was incapable. I was struggling because I had been placed in systems that were designed for people who process things differently. And instead of adjusting the system, my parents adjusted the narrative. They labeled me the problem. It was easier,
Cheaper.
cleaner. But what they did not understand was that the same way I learned to survive inside their narrative, I was now learning how to dismantle it. I started taking freelance work. Small projects at first. No last name attached. No references required. Just skill. Someone needed help reconciling accounts for a small retail business in Brooklyn. I did it. Someone else needed transaction mapping for a disputed invoice chain. I did that too. They did not know my history. They did not care. All they saw was the result. Clean reports. Clear explanations.
No mistakes.
One client turned into two. Two turned into five. The pay was inconsistent. Some weeks I made $800. Some weeks barely $200. But it was enough to stay afloat. Enough to keep going. Enough to prove something to myself that no one else had ever given me the chance to prove. I was not the liability they said I was. I was just unseen. But even as things improved slightly, the damage was still there.
Permanent.
Structured. I could not apply for anything formal. Any position that required references, background checks, verification. The moment my full name entered a system, the story followed. And the system believed the story. That is the part people underestimate. Systems do not need truth. They need consistency. And my parents had been very consistent. There were nights when I sat at my desk, staring at the wall, asking myself a question I never said out loud. What if this is permanent? What if this is just my life now? Not dramatic. Not tragic. Just limited. Controlled. Quietly reduced. I never let that thought stay too long. Because if I did, it would start to feel real. And I had already lived inside someone else's version of reality once. I was not going to do it again.
So I
Kept going. Tracking. Learning. Building. And then one night, something small shifted everything.
It was a Tuesday.
11:43 p.m. I remember the exact time because I wrote it down. I was reviewing an old set of transaction records for a client. Routine. Nothing unusual. But there was a pattern. Subtle. Almost invisible unless you were looking for it. A sequence of transfers that did not align with the stated purpose. The amounts were small. Spread out. Hidden inside legitimate activity. But the structure was precise. Intentional.
Familiar.
My chest tightened. Not from fear. Not from excitement. Recognition. I had seen this before. Not in a case study. Not in a textbook. In real life. Years ago. At home. I pulled up my notes. Old memories I had written down without knowing why.
Dates.
Numbers. Fragments of conversations. And slowly, piece by piece, they started to connect. The missing $3,000. The accounts I was suddenly removed from. The way my father always handled certain transactions personally. The way explanations were always just enough. Never complete. I sat there, completely still, staring at the screen. Because for the first time the question shifted. It was no longer, why do they say I am a thief? It became something else. Something heavier. Something I was not sure I was ready to say out loud. What if they needed me to be one?
I did not say it out loud that night.
I did not call anyone. I did not confront my parents. I just sat there, staring at the numbers, letting the pattern settle into place in my mind like something that had always been there, waiting for me to see it. Because once you recognize a structure like that, you cannot unsee it. And what scared me was not the pattern itself. It was how familiar it felt. The way small amounts were moved over time. The way everything was buried inside legitimate transactions. The way nothing looked wrong unless you knew exactly where to look. I had seen it before. I just did not have the language for it back then. I was 19, sitting at the kitchen counter, watching my father go through statements with a pen in his hand. Not writing much, just circling things,
Pausing.
thinking. And I remember asking a simple question. Why is that number different from last month? It was not an accusation. It was not even curiosity in the way adults understand it. It was just observation. And the room changed. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough. My father looked at me for a second too long. Then he smiled. Not warm, not reassuring, controlled. You are reading it wrong, he said. My mother nodded from across the room. Accounting is more complicated than it looks, Amelia. That was it. Conversation closed. But I remember something else. Something I did not understand until now. My grandmother was sitting by the window. Quiet. Watching. She did not correct him. She did not defend me. But she did not look convinced either. Her eyes moved from the paper to me and back again. Like she was measuring something. Not the numbers. The moment. After that, she started asking me questions. Not directly about money. Not about accounts. Just questions. When you look at something, Amelia, what do you notice first? Or, do you remember patterns easily? At the time, I thought it was random. Something to pass the afternoon. But now, sitting in my apartment years later, I realized it was not random at all.
She was testing something.
Confirming something. Seeing something that no one else was willing to see. I closed my laptop that night and leaned back in my chair. Because the question had changed again. It was no longer just about my parents. It was about her. What did she know? And when did she know it? The answer did not come immediately. It came slowly, in pieces. The next morning, I went looking for something I had not touched in years. A small box. Dark wood. Brass hinges. It had been sitting in the back of my closet since the day she gave it to me. I had almost forgotten about it. Almost. I pulled it out and placed it on the table. My name was written on a small label inside.
Her handwriting.
Precise.
Steady.
I remembered the day she gave it to me. I was 21. Visiting her apartment on the Upper West Side. Sunday afternoon. The same way we had done for years. Tea on the table. Light coming through the window just right. She called me into the living room and handed me the box without explanation. Keep this safe, she said. I asked what was inside. She shook her head. Not yet. I laughed a little. Thought it was dramatic. A gesture. Something sentimental. When should I open it? I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. The kind of look that feels like it is reaching past you into something you have not become yet. Then she said something I did not understand at the time. When they make it impossible for you to be anything other than what they say you are. I remember frowning.
Confused.
That sounds very specific. She smiled slightly. Not amused.
Certain.
It will make sense when it happens. I did not press her. That was not our dynamic.
She spoke when she chose to speak.
And when she did, it was never accidental. That was the last time she mentioned the box. She never brought it up again. Not when her health started to decline. Not when visits became shorter. Not even in the hospital.
She talked about other things.
Memories.
Books.
The garden she never got to finish. But not the box. And after she passed, I could not bring myself to open it. It felt like crossing a line I was not ready to cross. Like once I knew, I would not be able to go back to not knowing. So I left it. For years.
Until now.
I sat there staring at it, my hand resting on the lid, but not lifting it. Because suddenly the timing mattered. 15 years ago. That is what the envelope at the interview said. 15 years. Which meant she knew. Not recently. Not at the end. She knew back then. When I was still a teenager. When the story about me was just beginning to take shape.
She saw it.
Understood it. And instead of stopping it, she prepared something. Something that needed time. Something that needed a specific moment. I felt a strange mix of emotions sitting there. Not anger. Not betrayal. Something more complicated. because part of me wanted to ask why she did not just tell me, why she let it go this far, why she let me carry something that was never mine to begin with. But another part of me, the part that had been quietly learning, observing, connecting, understood something else. If she had told me back then, I would not have believed her. Not fully. Not in a way that could withstand what came after. Because belief without proof does not survive pressure. And my parents were very good at applying pressure. I took a slow breath and finally lifted the lid. I expected something dramatic inside that box. A letter. A confession. Something that would immediately explain everything and give me a clear direction. But when I opened it, what I found was not dramatic at all. It was quiet, structured, deliberate. Inside were documents. Neatly arranged, labeled, organized in a way that felt almost clinical. The first thing I saw was a ledger. Handwritten entries spanning years.
Dates.
Amounts. Account references.
No explanations.
Just data. Precise. Consistent. The second thing was a set of photocopied bank statements. Not full statements. Only selected pages. Highlighted in specific places. Patterns marked in yellow. Small transfers. Recurring intervals. Amounts just low enough to avoid attention. But, together, significant. And then, at the bottom of the box, a sealed envelope. Thicker than the others. My name written across the front in the same steady handwriting. I did not open it right away. Instead, I went back to the ledger, because something about it felt familiar. Not in a way I could immediately explain, but enough that my mind started connecting pieces before I could stop it. The dates aligned with moments I remembered. Times when tension in the house was just slightly higher. Times when conversations stopped when I entered the room. Times when my father spent longer than usual in his office with the door closed. I flipped through the pages slowly, not rushing, letting the structure reveal itself the way I had trained myself to see patterns over the past 2 years. And then there it was, a sequence, repeating every few months. Funds moving through intermediary accounts before landing somewhere else.
Clean.
Efficient. Hidden in plain sight. It was not random. It was a system. And it matched exactly what I had seen in that freelance case just days earlier. I leaned back in my chair, my hands still resting on the page, and let out a slow breath I did not realize I was holding. Because now the question was no longer theoretical. It was no longer something I was afraid to say. It was real. My father had not been covering up my mistake. He had been covering up his own. And I had been the explanation. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not overwhelmed. Not emotional. Just recalibrating. Because everything I had believed about the past 15 years had just shifted. Every accusation, every comment, every concern they shared with employers.
It was not about controlling me.
Not entirely. It was about protecting a narrative that needed a source. A consistent, believable source. And I had been convenient. I opened my eyes and reached for the sealed envelope. This one felt different. Heavier. Not just in weight but in intention. I ran my fingers along the edge before opening it carefully. Inside was a letter, dated 15 years ago. I recognized the handwriting immediately, not just from the label on the box, but from every note she had ever written me.
Short, direct,
unapologetically clear. Amelia, if you are reading this, then what I suspected has already happened. I paused there. Read it again. Slower, letting each word settle. Then, I continued. You are not imagining what you are seeing. And you are not who they say you are. My chest tightened slightly. Not painfully. Just enough to remind me I was still human in this moment that felt almost clinical. I have documented what I could. Not everything. Just enough. The truth does not need to be complete. It needs to be undeniable. I let out a small breath. Because that sentence, that one line, explained everything about how she had approached this. She had not tried to expose him immediately. She had not tried to confront him emotionally. She had built something else. Something that would survive denial. Something that would stand on its own. There will come a time, the letter continued, when your reputation is no longer your own. When you will be defined by something you did not do. When that happens, you must not defend yourself emotionally. You must respond structurally. I stopped reading. Just for a second. Because that was exactly what I had been doing without realizing it. The spreadsheets. The tracking. The patterns. I thought I had learned it out of necessity. But now I understood. I had learned it because she had seen it in me long before I ever needed it. I went back to the letter. You will want to confront them.
Do not.
You will want to explain yourself. Do not. Explanation invites debate. Structure eliminates it.
I almost smiled at that.
Not because it was comforting, but because it was precise. Exactly the kind of guidance I needed without even knowing I needed it. There is a reason this has not been addressed sooner, she wrote. Timing matters. Truth without the right moment is just noise. I leaned forward slightly, my focus narrowing. Because now we were getting to something important. Something intentional. I have entrusted this to someone outside the family. Someone who understands systems. Someone who will know when to act. My heart slowed. Not sped up.
Slowed.
Because suddenly that moment in the interview room, the CEO, the envelope he handed me, it was not random. It was not coincidence.
It was design.
This had been set in motion years ago. Before I even understood what was happening to me. Before my parents began shaping the story that would follow me into adulthood. She had seen it coming. And she had prepared not to stop it, but to end it. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the table. Then I looked at the rest of the documents again. Not as scattered pieces of evidence, but as parts of a system. A system designed to reveal the truth at the exact moment it would matter most. And for the first time, since this all began, I did not feel like I was reacting anymore. I felt like I was stepping into something that had already been built, waiting for me to understand it. I did not sleep that night. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because everything finally made sense in a way that would not let my mind rest. It was like solving a problem you have been staring at for years, and suddenly, every piece clicks into place at once. You do not celebrate. You do not relax. You just sit there, staring at the solution, realizing how long it had been in front of you. I spread everything out across the table. The ledger, the statements, the letter. I did not rush through them. I did not skim. I went line by line, the same way I had trained myself to do over the past 2 years. But this time, it was different. This was not a freelance client. This was not an abstract case study. This was my life. And the stakes were not theoretical anymore. They were real. I started with the ledger again. This time, I cross-referenced every entry with the statements. Dates aligned. Amounts matched. But more importantly, the structure held. That was the part that mattered. Because isolated transactions can be explained. Patterns cannot. Patterns reveal intent. And this pattern was consistent over 15 years.
That meant discipline.
Planning. Awareness. My father did not make mistakes. He built systems. And then he built a narrative to protect those systems. A narrative that required a source. A believable one. Someone close enough to be plausible, but not powerful enough to defend themselves. I paused there, my hand resting on the table, because saying it in my mind was one thing. Accepting it fully was something else. He chose me, not randomly, not impulsively, deliberately, because I was the one who noticed things, the one who asked questions, the one who could eventually see what he was doing. So instead of stopping me, he discredited me. Early, quietly,
consistently.
That way, if I ever spoke up, it would not matter. The system would already reject me. I leaned back slowly, letting that settle. Not with anger. Not yet. Just clarity. Because clarity changes how you move. It removes hesitation. It removes doubt. It replaces emotion with direction. And direction was what I needed now. I looked at the letter again. One line stood out more than the others. Truth without the right moment is just noise. I repeated it quietly.
Once. Twice.
Letting the weight of it sink in. Because now I understood what she had done. She did not try to expose him when she first noticed. She did not confront him when she gathered evidence. She waited. She built. She structured everything so that when the moment came, it would not be dismissed. It would not be debated. It would not be ignored. It would land exactly where it needed to land. And that moment was not in the past. It was now. The interview. The CEO. The envelope he handed me. That was not coincidence. That was activation. I checked the date on the letter again. 15 years ago. That meant she had prepared this long before I even graduated college. Long before my first job application. Long before my parents escalated from subtle comments to full reputation damage. She knew where this would go. Not every detail, but the direction. The outcome.
And she built something
that could survive that timeline. I stood up and walked to the window. The city was quiet. Early morning. The kind of stillness that only exists before everything starts moving again. I pressed my hand lightly against the glass, not thinking, just grounding myself. Because the next step mattered, more than anything I had done so far. I could not rush this. I could not react emotionally. I had to follow the structure she left behind. So I went back to the table and gathered everything carefully. Not in panic. Not in urgency. In order. Ledger first. Then statements. Then the letter. Everything aligned. Everything accounted for. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the information from the interview. The company. The CEO. The name he gave me. I stared at it for a moment, letting the connection form naturally instead of forcing it. Because she said she had entrusted this to someone outside the family. Someone who understands systems. Someone who will know when to act. That meant he knew. Not everything. But enough. Enough to recognize the moment when I walked into that room. Enough to see that the pattern she documented had reached its intended point. I closed the laptop slowly. Because suddenly, the interview itself did not matter anymore. This was not about getting a job. Not primarily. This was about something much bigger. Something that had been building for 15 years. And I was standing at the exact point where everything converged. I sat back down and looked at my phone. My parents' contact name still there. Unchanged.
Familiar.
I hovered over it for a second. Not to call. Just to observe my own reaction. There was no urge to confront them. No need to demand answers. Because for the first time,
I did not need anything from them.
Not validation. Not explanation. Not even acknowledgement. What I needed was already in front of me. Structured. Verified.
Timed.
I picked up the letter one more time and read the last line again. When the moment comes, do not ask for permission to be believed. I exhaled slowly. Because that line, that was the shift. For 2 years, I had been trying to be believed, trying to explain, trying to correct a story that had already been accepted. But belief is not negotiated. It is established. And the way you establish it is not through words. It is through proof that leaves no room for doubt. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back with the documents. Then I reached for my coat. Because the next step was not something I could do from my apartment. The moment had already started. And I was done waiting to catch up to it. I did not go back home. That is the first thing you need to understand. I did not drive to their house. I did not knock on the door. I did not sit across from them at the same kitchen table where everything started and ask them why. Because that version of me, the one who needed answers, the one who needed closure, she was already gone. She disappeared somewhere between the 27th rejection email and the moment I realized my father had been calling employers behind my back. What was left was not angry. It was not emotional. It was focused. And focus does not move backward. It moves forward. I took the subway downtown. 8:30 in the morning. Rush hour. People moving fast. No one looking at anyone. The kind of anonymity that used to make me feel invisible. But now it felt different. Not invisible. Untouchable. Because for the first time, I was not carrying something that could be taken from me. I had proof. Not belief. Not suspicion. Proof. And proof changes how you walk into a room. The building was exactly how I remembered it from the interview. Glass exterior. Security desk in the lobby.
Clean.
Structured. Controlled. I checked in. Gave my name. The receptionist looked at her screen for half a second, then nodded. They're expecting you. That word, expecting, landed differently this time. Not as a courtesy. As confirmation. I took the elevator to the 42nd floor. Same hallway. Same conference room. But the energy was not the same. Before, I had walked in hoping to be chosen. Now, I walked in knowing something had already been set in motion. The CEO was already there when I entered, standing by the window, hands behind his back, looking out over the city like he had been waiting for this exact moment. He turned when he heard the door close.
Amelia, he said.
Not a question. Not an introduction. Recognition. I nodded once and stepped inside. I did not sit down immediately. Neither did he. There was a pause. Not awkward. Not uncertain. Measured. Like both of us understood that this was not a normal conversation. You brought it, he said, glancing briefly at the folder in my hand. I held it up slightly. Everything she left. Another pause. Then he nodded. Not surprised. Just confirming something internally. Good, he said quietly. Then we can proceed. He gestured toward the table. This time, I sat. He did not take the head of the table. He sat across from me.
Direct.
Equal. Not interviewer and candidate. Something else. He opened a thin folder in front of him and slid a document across the table toward me. Before we go any further, he said, I want you to understand something clearly. I looked down at the paper. It was a summary. Not detailed. Just enough to outline what I already suspected. External reports. Anonymous concerns. Repeated over time. My name attached. My reputation documented. We received multiple calls over the past 2 years, he continued. Consistent messaging. Same source. Same story. I did not react. Not visibly. I had already lived this. Hearing it again did not change anything. Most companies, he said, would have stopped there.
He paused.
Let that settle. Then, we did not. I looked up at him then. Not questioning. Just listening. Because 15 years ago, he continued, your grandmother asked me to do something very specific. The room felt still again. Not heavy. Not tense. Just precise. She did not tell me everything, he said. She did not accuse anyone directly. She simply gave me a set of conditions. He reached into his folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. A copy of something handwritten.
Familiar.
If Amelia Wilson ever appears in front of you, he read slowly, and if there's a narrative surrounding her that does not align with the patterns I've documented, you will not reject her. He placed the paper down between us. You will investigate. Silence. Not empty.
Full.
Because in that moment, everything aligned again. The interview. The envelope. The way he looked at me when he walked into the room. It was never about evaluating me. It was about confirming the conditions she had set years ago. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Not overwhelmed, just absorbing the scale of it. So, this was never an interview, I said quietly.
He
shook his head once. No, he said. It was a trigger. The word landed exactly the way it was meant to. Not dramatic. Not exaggerated.
Precise.
A trigger. A point in a system where everything shifts from passive to active. I placed my hand on the folder I had brought. Then you already know what is inside this. He nodded. I have an idea, he said. But I need to see it from you. Not because he did not trust the documents, but because he needed to see how I would present them, how I would structure them, how I would respond. I opened the folder slowly. Not rushing. Not performing. Just following the structure I had learned. Ledger first. Then statements. Then the letter. I did not explain everything immediately. I did not rush to conclusions. I let the pattern speak. I walked him through it step by step.
Dates.
Transfers. Repetition. Intent. He did not interrupt. Not once. He just listened.
Watched.
Processed. And as I spoke, something shifted in the room. Subtle, but real. I was no longer the person defending herself. I was the person presenting a system. And systems do not need to be believed. They need to be understood. When I finished, I closed the folder and rested my hands on the table.
Calm.
Steady.
Certain.
He sat back slightly, exhaling slowly, not in surprise but in confirmation. She was right, he said quietly.
Not about me.
About the structure. about the timing, about everything. Another pause. Then he looked at me directly. The question now, he said, is not whether this is true. He tapped the folder lightly. It is what you want to do with it. And for the first time since this all began, I felt the weight of that question. Not as pressure, as choice. Because this was the moment she had prepared for. Not the discovery, not the pain, the decision. And decisions define everything that comes after. I did not answer him immediately. That is what people expect in moments like that. A clear decision. A strong statement. Something decisive that sounds like resolution. But the truth is, when you are finally given power after years of being stripped of it, your first instinct is not to act. It is to understand what that power actually means. I looked down at the folder between us. Not as evidence.
Anymore.
Not as proof. But as something else entirely. A lever. And levers do not just move one thing. They shift entire systems. I took a slow breath and leaned back slightly in my chair. What are my options? I asked. Not emotionally. Not defensively. Structurally. Because that is what this was now. Not a personal conflict. A system response. He did not answer right away. He studied me for a moment. Not judging. Measuring. The same way I had seen my grandmother do years ago. Then he nodded once. There are 3 paths, he said. He raised one finger. You can walk away. A pause. You take the truth. You rebuild your life privately. You never engage. You never expose. You simply replace what was taken from you. He raised a second finger. You can confront them directly. Privately. Present the evidence. Force acknowledgement.
Possibly settlement.
Closure. Another pause. Then the third finger. Or, he said, his voice slightly lower now, you can formalize this. The word landed differently. Not dramatic. Not aggressive. Just precise. Formalize how? I asked. Institutionally, he replied. Audit review. Legal exposure. Documentation entered into systems that cannot ignore it. I did not react immediately. I let each option settle. Because each one had a cost. Walking away meant freedom but no correction. The narrative they built would remain. Just irrelevant to me. Confronting them privately meant control but also risk. They had spent years controlling the story. They would not give that up easily. And the third option, that was something else entirely. Not revenge. Not even confrontation. It was exposure. Structured.
Permanent.
Unavoidable. I rested my hands on the table and looked at him. If this is formalized, I said slowly, it does not stay contained. He shook his head.
No, he said.
It does not. Another pause. It becomes record. Record. That word carried weight. Because records do not argue. They do not forget. They do not change based on who is telling the story. They exist. And once they exist, they replace everything that came before them. I looked down at the documents again. 15 years of structure. 15 years of preparation. Not to win an argument, but to create something that could not be dismissed. I thought about the past 2 years. The interviews. The rejections. The quiet humiliation of walking into rooms where people had already decided who I
was.
The way my name carried something I did not choose. And then I thought about something else. Something smaller, but sharper. Every time I stayed quiet when someone hinted at my reputation. Every time I smiled and moved on instead of correcting them. Every time I allowed the narrative to exist because I did not have the structure to dismantle it. That version of me was gone. Not because I became stronger, but because I became clearer. I looked back up at him. If I walk away, I said, they keep doing this. He did not respond. He did not need to. We both knew it was true. Systems like that do not stop on their own. They continue until something interrupts them. If I confront them privately, I continued, they deny it. Or minimize it. Or reframe it. He nodded slightly. Most likely, he said. I exhaled slowly. Because now the decision was no longer abstract. It was specific. Measured. I was not choosing between emotional outcomes. I was choosing between system responses. And one of those responses aligned with everything she had built. Not noise, not reaction, structure. I reached for the folder and turned it slightly so it faced him directly. Then we formalize it, I said. My voice was steady, not forceful, just certain. There was a pause, not because he was surprised, but because he was confirming something internally. Then he nodded once. All right, he said. No drama.
No escalation.
Just agreement. He closed his folder and stood up, walking toward the glass wall behind him. Then we do this correctly, he continued.
No shortcuts. No assumptions.
Everything verified. Everything documented. I stood as well, not out of formality but because the moment had shifted again. This was no longer a conversation. It was a process. What do you need from me? I asked. He turned back toward me. Everything you have, he said. And your involvement. A pause. You understand this pattern better than anyone else. I nodded slightly. Not out of pride. Just acknowledgement. Because he was right. I did understand it. Not just the numbers. The behavior. The logic behind it. The way it was designed to survive scrutiny by avoiding attention entirely. There is one more thing, he added. I looked at him. This will not be immediate, he said. Systems take time to move. I almost smiled at that. Not amused. Just recognizing the irony. 15 years to build. 2 years to break me down. And now, time again. But this time, on my side. I am not in a rush, I said quietly.
And I meant it.
Because, for the first time, I was not trying to catch up to something. I was aligned with it. He nodded once more, then extended his hand. Not as a formality. As confirmation. I took it. Firm. Steady.
No hesitation.
And just like that, the decision was no longer mine alone. It was part of a system that had already begun moving. I gathered the documents and placed them back into the folder carefully. Not protectively. Not urgently. Just precisely. Because this was no longer about holding on to proof. It was about placing it exactly where it needed to be. And as I walked out of that room, past the glass walls, past the reception desk, back into the movement of the city, something felt different. Not lighter. Not easier. Just aligned. Because for the first time in a long time, I was not reacting to a story that had been written about me. I was participating in rewriting it. The process did not start with an announcement. There was no dramatic email, no official statement, no moment where everything suddenly shifted in a way the outside world could see. That is not how systems move. They move quietly first. Internally. Structurally. The first call came 2 days later. Not from the CEO. From someone else. This is Daniel Reyes from Internal Audit, the voice said, calm, direct, practiced. We have been asked to conduct a preliminary review. We would like to schedule time with you. There was no urgency in his tone. No hint of what this would become. Just process. I agreed. The meeting was set for the following morning. 9 o'clock. Same building. Different floor. When I arrived, the environment felt different from the executive level upstairs. Less polished. More functional. Long tables. Multiple screens. People working quietly, focused on details instead of presentation. This was where things became real. Daniel was not what I expected. Mid-40s.
No suit-jacket.
No attempt to impress. Just someone who looked like he had spent years looking at things other people missed. He did not waste time. Walk me through it, he said, sliding a notepad in front of him. Not tell me your story. Not explain what happened. Just structure. I opened the folder and began again. Ledger. Statements. Patterns. But this time it was different. With the CEO, I had presented the system. Here, I had to defend it. Not emotionally. Structurally. Daniel interrupted. Frequently. Not to challenge me, but to refine the logic. Why this sequence? Why these intervals? What is the probability this is random? Each question forced me deeper into the structure. Sharper. More precise. By the end of the first hour, I was no longer explaining what I had found. I was demonstrating why it could not be anything else. Daniel leaned back slightly, tapping his pen against the table. Not skeptical. Not convinced.
Processing.
If this holds, he said slowly, this is not isolated. I nodded. It cannot be, I replied. Patterns like this do not exist in isolation. They require consistency, repetition, control over multiple points. He watched me for a second longer than necessary. Then he nodded once.
Good, he said.
That is what I needed to hear. Not because he believed me, but because the structure held under pressure. That was the first step. The second step came faster than I expected. By the afternoon, I was introduced to a legal consultant. Not as Amelia Wilson, the applicant, but as Amelia Wilson, the source. That shift was subtle, but it changed everything. The way they spoke to me, the way they asked questions, the way they documented every answer. This was no longer exploratory. It was procedural. We need to establish timeline integrity, the consultant said, flipping through copies of the documents. We need to confirm that what you are presenting aligns with external records. External records. That meant banks.
Institution.
Third parties that did not care about family narratives or personal history. Only data. And data does not lie. But it does need to be accessed. Verified.
Cross-checked.
That is where the process slowed. Not because there was doubt, but because systems require confirmation before they act. Days turned into a week. Then another. During that time, I did not contact my parents. Not once. I did not hint at what was happening. I did not give them an opportunity to adjust, because the moment they became aware, the system would change. And right now, I needed it to stay exactly as it was. Stable, predictable, observable.
I
focused on the work. Every request from audit. Every follow-up question from legal. Every clarification. I responded immediately.
Precisely.
No extra information.
No emotional framing.
Just structure. And slowly, the system responded. Bank confirmations came back. Transaction histories aligned. Account ownership traced. Not everything at once, but enough. Enough to move from possibility to probability. And then from probability to certainty. The day it shifted, I felt it before anyone said anything.
The tone changed. Subtle.
But clear. Questions became statements. This aligns with external data. This pattern is consistent across multiple accounts. There is no legitimate explanation for this structure. No one celebrated. No one reacted emotionally. Because this was not a moment for reaction. It was a moment for transition. From investigation to action. Daniel called me into a smaller room that afternoon. No large table.
No screens.
Just 2 chairs and a folder between us. We are moving forward, he said simply. I nodded, not surprised. Just acknowledging the shift. This will now be escalated, he continued. Board level. Legal exposure. Full review. He paused, then added, once that happens it cannot be contained. I met his gaze.
Steady.
I understand, I said. And I did. Because this was never about containment. It was about replacement. Replacing a narrative that had been repeated for years with something that could not be repeated differently.
He slid the folder toward me.
There is one more thing, he said. When this moves forward, your name will be part of it. Not a warning. Not a threat. Just fact. I looked down at the folder. Then back at him. My name has already been part of it. I said quietly. Just not the right version. There was a brief pause. Then he nodded once. Not approving. Not disagreeing. Just recognizing the truth of it. All right, he said. Then we proceed. And just like that, the process crossed a line it could not step back from. Not loud. Not visible. But irreversible. I left the building that day the same way I had entered. Through the lobby. Past the same security desk. Into the same city. Nothing looked different. No one knew what had just shifted. But I did. Because for the first time, the story about me was no longer being repeated behind closed doors. It was being replaced inside systems that do not forget. The notice did not come to me directly. That is how I knew it was real. When something is still uncertain, people communicate carefully. They loop you in. They prepare you. They soften the language. But when a system moves past uncertainty, it does not announce itself to the source. It moves through the structure it was designed for. I found out 3 days later. Not through a call. Not through an email. Through a change in access. Daniel called me into the same room. Same table. Same notepad. But this time, there was something else. A second folder. Thicker. Labeled. Board review. Restricted. He did not sit immediately. He placed the folder on the table and looked at me for a moment before speaking. It has been escalated, he said. Simple.
Direct.
No explanation needed. I nodded once. Because this was the point where everything shifted from controlled analysis to institutional exposure. He sat down and opened the folder. Inside were documents I had never seen before. Not mine. Not my grandmother's. External confirmations. Bank certifications. Transaction validations from third-party institutions. The kind of documentation that does not rely on interpretation. Only verification. He turned one page toward me. This came in yesterday, he said. I looked at it carefully. It was a confirmation of account ownership tied to a sequence of transfers I had identified in the ledger.
Names. Dates.
Signatures. Everything aligned.
No gaps. No ambiguity.
Another page. And this, he continued, this one showed a longer pattern. Years of movement. Small amounts, building into something undeniable. I did not react immediately. Not because it was not significant, but because I had already seen the structure. This was just confirmation. He watched me for a moment. Then he said something that shifted the weight of the room. The board convenes tomorrow morning. I looked up, not surprised, but aware of what that meant. Because a board meeting at that level is not casual. It is not exploratory. It is not hypothetical. It is action. Will I be there? I asked. He shook his head. Not initially, he said. This starts as an internal review. A pause. But your work will be presented. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Not disappointed. Not excluded. Just processing. Because this was never about being seen in the moment. It was about the system recognizing what had already been built. And after that? I asked. He closed the folder halfway. Not fully. Just enough to signal transition. After that, he said, it depends on how they respond. That was the part no one could predict. Not the data. Not the structure. The response. Because once something becomes undeniable, the only variable left is how people choose to face it. I stood up slowly. Not out of tension. Just alignment. Because there was nothing else for me to do in that room. The process had moved beyond my direct control. And that was exactly how it was supposed to happen. I left the building and stepped into the afternoon light. The city felt the same. People moving. Cars passing. Conversations happening. No one aware that somewhere in a room they would never see, a version of my life was being reviewed. Not as a story. Not as a narrative. As a system. That night, I did not go home right away. I walked. No destination.
No urgency.
Just movement. Because this was the first moment in 2 years where I was not reacting to something. I was waiting for something that had already been set in motion. And waiting when you have been in control for so long feels different. It is not passive. It is contained. I checked my phone once. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing from my parents. Nothing from anyone. Of course not. They did not know.
Not yet.
And when they did, it would not come from me. That was important. Because this was never going to be a conversation. It was going to be a recognition. I got home late. Sat at the same table where everything had started to come together. The box still there. The documents still aligned. I did not open them again. I did not need to. I knew what they contained. I knew what they meant. And more importantly, I knew what they would do. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. Not from anxiety. Not from anticipation. Just awareness. Because somewhere at that exact time, the board was meeting. Reviewing.
Questioning.
Confirming. And for the first time in 15 years, the narrative they had built around me was not the only version in the room. There was another one now.
Structured.
Verified. Impossible to ignore. I made coffee.
Sat down.
Waited. Not checking my phone every few minutes. Not pacing. Not imagining outcomes. just present. Because whatever happened next was no longer about belief. It was about recognition. And recognition, once it happens, does not reverse. Hours passed. Slowly. Then quickly. Time does that when you are no longer measuring it.
It shifts.
It moves differently. At 11:47, my phone rang. Daniel. I answered immediately. It is done, he said.
No build-up. No explanation.
Just finality. I did not speak right away. Not because I did not understand, but because I did. Completely. What happens now? I asked. There was a brief pause on the other end. Then he said something that stayed with me longer than anything else in that moment. Now, he said, the system corrects itself. I exhaled slowly. Not relief. Not release. Just completion of a phase. Because this was not the end. Not yet. This was the point where everything that had been hidden began to surface. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But inevitably. And inevitability is the one thing no narrative can survive. The correction did not arrive as a single moment. It did not come with a headline or a public announcement or some dramatic reveal where everything was suddenly exposed all at once. That is not how systems correct themselves. They do not explode. They recalibrate. Quietly. Precisely. And then the effects begin to ripple outward. The first ripple came in a form I recognized immediately. An email. Subject line. Clarification request. Employment reference. It was from one of the firms that had rejected me almost a year earlier. The tone was different this time. Not dismissive. Not neutral. Careful. We are conducting an internal review of prior reference communications associated with your application, it read. We would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I stared at the screen for a moment. Not surprised. Just acknowledging the shift. Because this was how it started. Not with accusations. With questions. Questions that should have been asked 2 years ago. Questions that had been replaced by assumptions. And now the system was asking them again. I agreed to the call. Not to explain myself. Not to defend anything. Just to observe. The conversation lasted 12 minutes. The recruiter's tone was controlled, but there was something underneath it. Not guilt. Awareness. We received information at the time that influenced our decision, she said. We are now reviewing the validity of that information.
I did.
Not fill the silence that followed. I did not offer additional details. Because this was not my process to lead. It was theirs to correct. Is there anything you would like to add? She asked finally. I paused. Not because I needed to think, but because the answer mattered. No, I said. I believe the documentation you now have will answer your questions. There was a brief pause on her end. Then, understood. The call ended.
Clean. Contained.
Structural. That same pattern repeated throughout the week. Different companies. Different voices. Same shift. The narrative that had followed me into those rooms was being questioned. Not emotionally. Not publicly. But internally. And internal correction is what eventually becomes external truth. By the third day, something else happened. Something I did not expect. A message from someone I recognized immediately. The HR associate from the consulting firm. The one who had hesitated on the phone months ago. The one who had almost said too much. I wanted to reach out personally, the message read. We have been notified of significant discrepancies in the information we received regarding your candidacy. I am sorry. I read that line twice. Not because I needed the apology, but because of what it represented. Recognition. Not of my feelings. Of the error. And errors, once recognized, do not stay isolated. They get corrected. Systematically. I did not respond immediately. When I did, it was simple. Thank you for the update. No more. No less. Because this was not about rebuilding relationships. It was about restoring accuracy. And accuracy does not require emotion. That evening my phone rang. A number I had not seen in 2 years. My parents' house. I let it ring. Not out of avoidance. Not out of fear. Just choice. It stopped. Then started again. I watched it. Not reacting. Just observing. Because for the first time, the direction of communication had changed.
They were no longer speaking about me.
They were trying to reach me, and that shift alone told me everything I needed to know. I did not answer. Not that night. Not the next morning. Because whatever they were going to say, it would not change the structure that had already been set in motion. And I was no longer interested in words that existed outside of structure. 2 days later, the message came. Not a voicemail. Not an apology. A text. From my father. We need to talk. I read it once. Then again. The wording was familiar.
Direct.
Controlled. The same tone he had used for years when he wanted to define the terms of a conversation. But something was different now. Not in the message. In me. Because for the first time, that tone did not carry authority. It carried reaction. I did not respond. Not immediately. Because this was no longer a conversation he controlled. It was a response to something he could not. And responses do not get to set the terms. That afternoon, Daniel called again. You may start receiving contact, he said. Not asking. Informing. I nodded, even though he could not see it. I already have, I replied. A brief pause. Then, that is expected. Of course it was. Because once the system begins correcting, the people who benefited from the original narrative feel it first. Not publicly. Internally, their certainty shifts. Their control weakens. And the only thing left is reaction. Do I need to engage? I asked. No, he said. Not unless you choose to. I leaned back, slightly in my chair, letting that settle.
Because choice, that was the difference now.
Not survival. Not defense.
Choice.
Understood, I said. After the call ended, I sat there for a moment, the room quiet, the city moving outside like it always did. And I thought about something I had not allowed myself to think about before. Not the past. Not what they had done. But what this meant going forward. Because correction is not just about undoing damage. It is about redefining what exists after the damage is gone. And for 2 years my life had been shaped by a narrative I did not control. Now that narrative was being replaced. Not rewritten by me. Replaced by something stronger. Something structured. Something that did not rely on belief. And that changes everything. Because once the system knows who you are, the world adjusts accordingly. Not instantly. Not loudly. But inevitably. And inevitability is something I had learned to recognize. Because it feels like this. Quiet.
Certain.
Already in motion. The message from my father stayed on my phone for 3 days before I opened it again. Not because I was avoiding it. Not because I was afraid of what it said. But because for the first time it did not have urgency. It did not have power. It was just there. And that changed everything. On the 4th day, I read it again. We need to talk.
No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement.
Just the same tone he had always used.
Direct.
Controlled. Expecting response. I stared at the screen for a moment, and then I did something I had not done in years. I put the phone down and did nothing. Because silence, when it is chosen, is not weakness. It is control. And I had spent too long responding to conversations that were never designed to hear me. That same afternoon, I received another call. This time from the CEO. Not formal. Not scheduled. Amelia, he said, his tone calm as always, are you available to come in tomorrow? I paused for a second. Not to consider, but to transition. Because I knew what this meant. Yes, I said. I will be there. The next morning, the building felt different again. Not physically. Structurally. The same glass. The same lobby. The same elevator ride. But the context had changed. I was no longer the applicant. I was no longer the source. I was something else now. When I entered the conference room, it was not just him. 3 other people. Different departments. Different roles. But the same focus. Not on me. On what I represented. He gestured for me to sit.
No introductions. No formalities.
Just transition. We have completed the initial review, he said. His voice steady. Controlled. The findings have been confirmed across all relevant channels. I nodded slightly. Not surprised. Just acknowledging the completion of that phase. He slid a document toward me. Not evidence. Not analysis. a summary.
Clean. Direct.
This will be entered into official record, he continued, and distributed where necessary to correct prior reporting. Correct prior reporting. That phrase carried more weight than anything else he could have said, because that was it. Not revenge. Not exposure. Correction. I looked at the document. My name.
Clear.
Not attached to accusation. Not surrounded by doubt. Just accurate. For a moment, I did not move. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I was recognizing something I had not felt in a long time. Alignment. My identity and the system finally matching. There is also something else, he added. I looked up. He placed another paper on the table. This one different. We would like to extend an offer, he said.
No build-up.
No performance. Just fact. I looked at the title. Forensic Analysis Division. My eyes moved across the details.
Salary.
Benefits. Structure. But what mattered was not the numbers. It was the role. Not as someone trying to prove herself. As someone already recognized for what she could do. I took a slow breath. Not to calm myself. Just to mark the moment. Because this was not about getting a job. It was about stepping into something I had already been doing without acknowledgement. Take your time, he said. But I did not need time. Not for this. Because this decision had already been made long before I walked into that room. I accept, I said. My voice steady. Not emotional. Just certain. He nodded once.
No smile. No congratulations.
Just confirmation. Because this was not a reward. It was placement. After the meeting ended, I gathered the documents slowly. Not out of hesitation. Just precision. And as I walked out of that room, something shifted in a way I could not fully describe. Not relief. Not victory. Something quieter. More permanent. The absence of resistance. For 2 years, everything had required effort. Every step. Every application. Every explanation. And now there was no resistance. Just movement. That evening, I finally responded to my father's message. Not immediately. Not impulsively. Carefully. One sentence. There is nothing left to discuss. I read it once. Then sent it.
No anger. No explanation.
No invitation for response. Because conversations require two sides that still need something from each other. And I did not need anything anymore. The reply came within minutes. Longer this time. Different tone. Amelia, you are misunderstanding things. We were trying to protect you. You need to let us explain. I read it. Slowly. Not reacting. Just observing. Because even now, even with everything that had happened, the structure of his response had not changed. Reframe. Minimize. Redirect. But it did not land the same way anymore. Because narratives only work when they are the only version available. And now, they were not. I did not respond. Not because I could not, but because I did not need to. And that was the final shift. Not the job. Not the correction. Not even the exposure. The fact that his words no longer defined anything about me. Weeks passed. Quietly. The system continued. Adjusting. Old records corrected. New ones established. Opportunities appearing in places that had once been closed. Not because people suddenly believed in me, but because the structure now supported it. And that is the difference most people do not understand. It was never about proving them wrong. It was about removing the system that made them right. I still think about my grandmother sometimes. Not in a sentimental way. Not with regret. Just recognition. Because she did not give me a solution. She gave me timing. She did not stop what was happening. She made sure it would end correctly. And that matters. Because anyone can react to injustice. Very few people know how to design its conclusion. I still have the box. The ledger. The letter. Not because I need them anymore, but because they represent something that does not change. Truth, when it is structured properly, does not need to be defended. It just needs to be placed at the right moment. And when it is, everything else adjusts around it.